Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. This is the Finch Show, and I am James Finch. My guest on this episode is Danny Curry, who also goes by CTK Creations. He is the founder of the Iron Legion as well as the Iron Idiots, and he's just a fantastic guy. We had a phenomenal conversation. I'm going to get into it. Ladies and gentlemen, here's Danny Curry. Okay, so the interesting question that I love to ask folks who are into this kind of stuff is when did, at its origin, when did the whole 3D printing thing begin for you?
So it started pretty early for me, at least I know compared to like a lot of my friends that do it as well. So my first introduction to 3D printing was in high school. Our robotics team won a 3D printer by placing well in a competition, or we got a sponsor or something like that. Um, and so it was really it was really funny because it was like we had this printer, but we basically didn't touch it for like a full year because no one knew anything about the technology. This was like 2016, I think. So 3D printing was still like it wasn't quite the big boom it was in like 2012, 2013 when MakerBot first showed up and everything, but it was still this like mystical technology. Everyone's like, "Oh, it's a 3D printer. How does that work? It's so complicated." And so I basically just sat on a shelf for the longest time, but then finally, like at the end of the year, like a week or two before I graduated, I think it was, we were like, "No, we're getting it out. We're printing something." And so we took it out, and I learned the very bare minimum terminology of the printer. And we 3D printed this little like 3-inch tall like red Groot, which you can actually find a post of it on my Instagram. And so that was kind of like that was my first intro to it, and I was like, that seems really cool. I want to get more into it, but at that point, I was graduating, so I didn't really get to do a whole lot more with it. But then it really picked up because while I was searching for colleges, um, during the tour of the engineering department, because I was originally going to study engineering, there was a club on the campus that was basically just like a mini maker space, and it was called the Maker Society. And they just had a lot of 3D printers that they built themselves. And they basically, while I was there, asked a lot of questions and found out like, oh, well, every year they do like a little workshop. You can go in and build your own 3D printer. And this was before like, the CR10 or the Ender 3 were really a thing. So it's not like printing wasn't cheap yet. It wasn't really all that accessible. And so I was like, oh, that sounds super cool. I want to be involved in that. And then literally like within a month of starting college, I was not only a member, but I was an officer of the club. I built my first printer through the club in like that February, my first year. And then it just kind of like kept going. The club kind of had a little print farm. We did a lot of workshops with it. And so I learned a lot about the technology very quickly in almost a trial by fire way. And when I say trial by fire, I literally mean my printer that I hand built caught on fire at one point and had to be put out. And so, yeah, and it was really cool because I kind of got in just before I think the newest wave of 3D printing kind of started happening, which was like maybe 2018-ish when Creality kind of changed the landscape with all of these like really cheap, like more I'll say user friendly, but I guess I should say like tinkerer friendly printers, where it's like the cheapest option you had before that was a Prusa, which was, still running close to $1,000 after shipping. And then the Prusa kits are really intensive to put together and everything. And so, yeah, I figured out the fun way how complicated the technology was just to then see it get easier for everyone around me, and kind of see how a lot of that changed. But anyway, yeah, that was the very long-winded answer of it started introduced senior year of high school and then totally changed my life freshman year of college. So
It's a podcast. We love long-winded answers here. So that's great. So what do you say like built your printer? Was there just like components around and you sort of figured it out that way, or how was that working?
So the club I think it was in 2015, 2014, and I started college in 2017. And so basically, the workshop, which was called Build Series 3D, basically followed the open source designs that Prusa put out. So originally they were like the Prusa Mandel printers. They're really janky looking things, but by the time I got there, the designs that we were using were based on the open source publication from I think the beginning of 2016, which was essentially the Prusa i3 Mark II. Um, but because it's not like we ordered a kit, like we were just using the open source designs, it's literally like on the printers we had in the shop, we printed the components. We worked with a local CNC and laser cutting place to laser cut all of the frames out of like MDF board, and we outsourced all of the heated beds. Any piece of wiring was like we just ordered the wire, and then it was up to me to like measure, cut, crimp, solder, like the whole thing. Like it took over a month to put this printer together because it wasn't a kit. Like, the boards we bought, I had to load the code on, flash the firmware, do all this stuff. Like it was to date the most intensive like printer build I've ever done, but I'm grateful because it's like it was the first one. So after that, it just kind of got easier. But yeah, it was like full on like DIY hacker level putting printers together. So unfortunately, like I remember when I put my first CR10 together and it took like 20 minutes. I was like, what the heck? Crap, I got cheated out of this.
Yes. I wish my process had been as good as that. My first one was like it was a Flash Forge like Adventure Pro 3, which is, I mean, I hate to use the term plug and play, but in terms of the fact that you basically got it out and there was like no assembly other than
it was a pre-assembled printer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so because of that, I didn't get to learn anything. Like anytime something went wrong with it, I'd spend all these times on forums trying to figure out what the heck was wrong with it, and then you mean I have to take it apart to like how much money?
Yeah, exactly, right. And then it's like a lot of those, it's like they're meant so you don't even really see the inner workings, and so you're like you have no idea what went wrong. Like that's always the fun part of like there's a huge disconnect between people who know how to use a 3D printer and people who know how to fix a 3D printer because of the fact that like there are so many different options when it comes to getting into the hobby. You can do what I did and spend a month like custom measuring wires, or thankfully there are also though options for people who just want to be able to get a machine. But I'm a huge advocate in making sure that you have an understanding of the technology, break it early, learn how to fix it. And so that way you're not, you don't want to be afraid of the technology is what I usually tell a lot of the people in the workshops that I host. So
that is 100% the process. I remember there were so many times early on in my 3D printing and you've probably heard this, and I know the listeners have heard it, but I was like in this position where I knew nothing about 3D printing. And then my wife just got me one for Christmas because I had offhand mentioned that it looked cool. And then I spent like months ready to throw the thing in the freaking fire pit because I was just like, But now it was like just 2 days ago, the touch sensor on my CR10 Max went out. And I'm just like, oh, I know how to do that. I know how to swap that out. That's easy. But it's because you had to go through that process first to learn all that stuff hands on and go through those frustrations.
Yeah.
To get
no, exactly. And it's like there's I'm sure I'll end up talking a little bit about it later, but going back to I had started a company like pretty early on in college, and one of the things we did was like repair services for 3D printers for like other local schools, because obviously a lot of schools have 3D printers, but a lot of the like science teachers or whatever don't necessarily know how to fix them, and so it was one of those things where we got called out because the teacher was struggling for about 2 months trying to get this printer to work and everything else. I think it was they had like a MakerBot and a Dremel, and we got there and it was literally just that the nozzles on both were clogged, and like that was it. And it was like I got there and within less than 10 minutes both of them were running perfectly fine. And it's always one of those awkward things where it's like oh well, it was only a 10-minute fix, like, and it's like, well, it was a 10-minute fix because I had to suffer for like dozens of hours on other machines before this to be able to be like, oh, that's this issue, I know how to fix that.
Yep. And I feel like a lot of times that's the way those jobs work, is that they're not paying you for the 10 minutes. They're paying for the experience that was gained so that it only took you 10 minutes, They're
covering the cost of the pain you went through to be able to identify it faster.
Right. So was it pretty early on in your 3D printing career that you decided to like integrate that with the nerd cosplay stuff, or did that kind of have an evolution to it?
So it was a very natural progression. So I started cosplay basically like roughly the end of my sophomore year of high school. I actually got into it for charity reasons. There was a local charity group called Heroes for Hope that was based like roughly 30, 45 minutes from me. And between like, I didn't even know cosplay was like a thing until basically late my freshman year of high school when I saw a video that Stan Winston Studios had shared on one of their YouTube channels of a high schooler who built an Iron Man suit out of peppercorn, which, for those who are listening and don't know what peppercorn is, it's basically like origami on steroids. You know, it's a
Oh,
it was the only way you could do cosplay honestly before 3D printing showed up, and so it's a matter of people would get these low poly models and use a software called peppercorn to slice them up and have it so you could print them on either like cardstock or foam, and create templates where you could cut it in certain ways, fold it, glue it, and you got your rough forms. And the way basically any Iron Man suit used to be made pre 3D printing was either out of foam with that, or people would they do peppercore with like a heavy duty cardstock. They would coat the cardstock in fiberglass resin and then cover it with Bondo to give it the level of thickness needed and be able to smooth it out and everything. And it was a very intensive process. I had tried making an Iron Man helmet that way, you know, 8 years ago or whenever it was, and it was not a process for me. I eventually went back and was able to get down some of the foam stuff, but yeah. So anyway, I got started with all of that in high school for charity stuff, after I was inspired by that kind of stuff. And my first suit, which funny enough is still my current suit, uh, I got over the summer between my sophomore and junior year of high school to start cosplaying. And that was actually it was a solid fiberglass statue. Like that's what that suit started as, is it was a kit for like a display statue that like movie theaters or someone else would have. And my mom, who's also thankfully into a lot of this kind of geeky stuff and everything, we basically worked for a few months to get it wearable, and it was not comfortable, and it's still not comfortable. But as soon as I picked up 3D printing, it was very much a matter of it's like, well, I can use this thing for that thing, and it was very much I started with a faceplate, and then a helmet, and then a glove. Um, and then it was just kind of being in the right place at the right time. I ended up in situations where I started doing a lot more stuff. Like I wouldn't have considered myself someone who does like 3D printing for cosplay until probably around 2018, because I ran into a YouTuber and content creator named King Vader. He was very big on Vine. He has a large following still. And I ran into him at Comic Con and somehow ended up in the situation where he was asking me to 3D print him an Iron Man suit for a parody video that he was doing for Avengers Endgame. And that was to date the most intensive project I think I've ever done. It was the first time, other than a faceplate, that I had done full finishing work on any 3D print. And so I literally went from like a half finished helmet to I had 6 weeks to do a full 3D printed Iron Man suit,
oh.
and it was not fun. It was like from start to like, we got him in, we 3D scanned him to be able to like scale the files and stuff around him. And yeah, it was roughly 6 weeks from that date that we first got him in for that 3D scan for when I had to deliver it. I pulled like 3 all-nighters to get it finished. I had no idea what I was doing half the time, just kind of figuring it out. But, just like with building the printer, trial by fire. And so then after that, it was like, okay, well, if I want to make myself like just a helmet now, it's a lot easier because I just did all this in such a short amount of time. But yeah, so that was kind of when those things really fully met. And then ever since that project, basically, I almost exclusively use 3D printing for most of my cosplay builds.
Mm-hmm. Now, the when you were doing that suit prior to that, did you have any experience with finishing 3D prints, or was it just like you
No,
said, a
it
trial by
was,
fire thing?
yeah, it was, uh, I had done a Stormbreaker that was very much like really rough sanded and like heavy coated with primer, just like to kind of fill in lines. And it's like, at the time I was like, oh, this looks great. And looking back on it now, it's like, oh my God, it's an abomination. And so that was like my first time. that and a baby Groot were my first experience doing painting with 3D prints. And then, as I said, I basically, by the time I signed up for doing a full suit, I had only had a half finished helmet that actually like looked decent, following the same process that I use today and everything. So yeah, it was very much like I just jumped right into it. I had to learn quick. And at the time there weren't really that many tutorials out there for a lot of that kind of stuff, which thankfully there are now. But it was very much just kind of like picking up different things that I had learned from other mediums over the past several years, and just hoping it worked out.
Yeah, you're right. There are so many people out there who just have so many great DIY videos and how-to videos. Frank's, of course, one of them.
Yeah,
The DIY
I
content he
I
puts out.
tell him all the time. I think I literally texted him yesterday. I was like, "Hey, just a reminder, but like, I wish I wish I had someone like you around when I got started with all
Right.
this, because it's like there's technical channels and there's a lot of stuff like that. But I think what Frank did really well was the fact that it was like he didn't overcomplicate it. It's like, okay, yeah, this is the printer. This is the stuff you can do with it. There's a lot of other stuff that you can learn later, but like you don't need that for now.
Mhm.
Sandpaper, print, go. And
Yeah.
it's like it was something that a lot of people in the community, I think, slowly were understanding, but no one really thought about like, okay, well, how would we share this easily with people outside of the community? And so that that's why I really appreciate the fact that he just kind of like did it. And I remember there was a lot of stuff that, because of the way Frank did stuff, a lot of stuff in the community changed. Like I remember, because when I first got started with 3D printing, PLA was a very different material than it is now. PLA was like, printing temperature was way lower, and it was a weak material. You could not sand that thing with an electric sander, or it got totally warped. It would melt. I literally had prints that I melted by trying to use an electric sander early on. And so that was just one of those things where it was like, it became the standard of like, oh, well, yeah, you don't use electric sanders on 3D prints. But then no one really ever thought about, oh, well, I mean, a lot of the materials are different now, at least for PLA. It's like PLA is not the same that it used to be. So why not try it? Everyone always shot the idea down. And then I was, I just remember watching one of Frank's videos of just like watching him take a palm sander to a faceplate. And I was like, I tried that and it didn't work. What the heck? What the heck? And then I tried it again later. I was like, what? This works now.
Right.
Okay. All right, then.
Yeah, we were God, last weekend, Brittany and I did a live stream, Captain Britt, and we got talking about Frank because he's riding that, like, I don't know what technical name for that thing with just one wheel on it. Do you ever notice that thing got
like a unicycle?
Yeah, it's a motorized though, where it's just like, have you seen this thing?
The one wheel.
Yeah, the one wheel. And I just, Brittany and I were talking this, like, we almost need to get together as a community and take like an insurance policy out on this guy, because if he jacks himself up on that thing. But on the flip side, if
he's going to, it's like some of my favorite conversations with Frank is just like, oh, how'd you get that scar? Oh, I dropped a soldering iron and then I caught it because my reflexes are that good. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, good job.
Well, on the flip side, if he does crack his skull open, he'll just 3D print himself a new one and finish it, and it'll look better than his real head. So it's okay. So I had heard, going back to your suit, someone told me that thing's like 70 pounds. Is that true?
So when I first got it, yeah, I don't actually know its exact weight now. It's probably closer to 60 because I've switched stuff out. Like the helmet is no longer like solid fiberglass and Bondo. As of now, I usually use the Marvel Legends helmet because it's just really easy. And even though that helmet is like huge, so is my suit. So like proportions wise, it's good. But yeah, the suit is probably around 60 pounds now. So it is the beefiest out of all of our suits, to say the least.
Wearing that thing around a con all day long. Oh my God.
Yeah, it's in that suit, I'm basically like, I'm close to 6'6", because the boots add, so the helmet adds about an inch and a half, and then if the faceplate's on top of the helmet, it's a little bit taller. And then my boots add basically another 3 to 3.5 inches. And so it's like, yeah, when I'm wearing that thing, I'm getting close to 6.5 feet tall and like 4 feet wide basically. And so it's like Yeah, I make myself known. It's hard to miss me in a crowd.
So speaking of crowd, we have to talk about the genesis of the Iron Idiots and the Iron Legion.
Yeah, it was literally we like to joke that all of that kind of started just because I got lonely. So yeah, fun fact for any listeners who don't know this about my username, but CTK actually stands for Curry the Kid, because when I started cosplaying, or at least when I started building for cosplay, there was like a 15-year gap minimum between me and anyone else I knew that did actual building. Like I knew people that were interested in the hobby, but it'd be like, oh, they ordered a costume from Party City or an anime thing on Amazon or something, but no one really built stuff. And so I kind of was like, oh, I'm Curry the Kid. I'm the only kid that's doing this. And so yeah, I kind of got tired of not really having anyone else my age that did stuff similar. And I was talking with a good friend of mine, Copeland, whose handle is Melbourne Iron Man. He was kind of the first one I connected with out of everyone in the group. And we were both kind of talking about that. Like, yeah, it sucks. There's like not that many people that do this. It would be cool if we had a group chat. And there are Facebook groups and there's other stuff, but those have a very specific dynamic that is not like a small chat with some friends or something, and we kind of wanted something that was a little more personal, not like, oh, I'm going to just post this random question and hope people comment and answer, but more like wanting to get to know people. So we spent like a week basically just tracking down different accounts. And I had actually known or heard of everyone except for Frank and Kiera when we first made that chat, because Emily had reached out to me when she was working on, I think it was her first printed suit. It might have been her second. I don't remember which suit she was working on. Basically, just to ask for some advice because she saw King Vader's suit. Our buddy Nick Walsh 3D. I had seen a lot of the cool models and stuff he was working on. We have Conrad Dehota Craft, who to date is like one of the most perfectionist builders I think I've ever met. Like he's super talented at 3D modeling as well as finishing work. Um, we got our friend Malik Thaxton, who I met via Facebook because I was selling some extra prints I had. And so it was just kind of like, just by coincidence, within the last 6 months or a year, I had like been introduced to, but didn't really know any of these people. And none of us had known who Frank was at the time because this was a little bit before Frank kind of became present. But yeah, so it was just, I reached out to all of them. I was like, hey, I don't know about you guys. I'm the only person I know that makes Iron Man suits and does 3D printing or anything like that. Would you guys be open to like being part of a small group chat? And thankfully everyone said they were down. And like basically a few weeks before the world shut down in 2020, I put this little group chat together, the seven of us, and yeah, then just kind of on its own over the next couple months, each of us kind of found Frank just organically, and all were talking to him, and so yeah, he's now definitely part of the group.
And there it is.
That was how the Iron Legion started. We made a Discord server and everything else, and just kind of like as time's gone on, obviously not everyone builds for the same reasons. Some people post their stuff just because they like building. Other people are a fan of the stuff that comes with content creation, regardless of, if they're going for a following or not. And so the Iron Idiots itself kind of came out more from the group of the four of us were all trying to meet up for a convention, I think was how it started, which was Silicon. And so we kind of had a group chat with the four of us for planning that kind of stuff. And it was just a matter of the four of us, I guess, were trying to do a little more content creation stuff. And after WonderCon and everything else, we were just kind of like, yeah, it's the Iron Idiots, so, it's a little subgroup, I guess, of the Iron Legion, but that wouldn't be around if it wasn't for the main group. And we don't see any difference between like, the Iron Idiots versus everyone else in Legion. Like we're all thankfully like really good friends, and we were all really good friends before like anyone really saw any success on social media, which I really like, because it was literally like we made the group chat, and then it was basically like a month after that, Kiera blew up on Reddit, and then like a month or two after that, like Frank blew up on his stuff, and then Emily, and then it was just like it was really cool getting to have this chat when we were all tiny and then just like be lucky enough to see each other all start having a lot of success and everything. So,
Right. Well, then the friendship's genuine.
well,
You know,
yeah,
it,
it's like, and especially because as soon as people started blowing up, it's like, yeah, Emily has a huge following now compared to she was the smallest account when we started. Um, and so it's like, yeah, it's one of those things where I know that if it was like 6 months later, and I was like, hey, you want to be part of a group chat? She probably was getting like a ton of other messages like, hey, I'd love to talk to you and everything else. And so it's like, yeah, I'm really grateful that the timing on all that worked out because it's like, yeah, we were all just genuine friends that did the same kind of stuff, and now we're lucky enough to be doing a lot of it together, like for the internet, I guess. I don't know, however you want to describe it.
for the rest of our enjoyment, that's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's it like going to a con, like in that whole get up and everything? I know you said you're like an NBA player in the thing, but
So, wearing an Iron Man suit to a convention is very different than wearing anything else to a convention. Like my main costume these days, other than Iron Man, is my Star Lord, and that one is always like, I get stopped for photos and stuff. But it's not an Iron Man suit. When you go in an Iron Man suit, you have to have an understanding that you are a set piece once you get there. It's like, you know, I imagine, at least I know everyone in our group understands that if you're wearing an Iron Man suit to convention, you're going so that way people can take photos of you. Like you aren't there for you, you're there for them now. Um, and so I first wore a suit to a con, I think it was back in like 2017-ish. And my first job ever was actually because I wore an Iron Man suit to Comic Con because I met my boss, or my then future boss, who also had an Iron Man suit. And so we kind of related of like, oh wow, we both have Iron Man suits. And I found out later he has a party company, and so I got hired for his party company. But yeah, and so it's like wearing one Iron Man suit like causes a scene. Uh, Having two Iron Man causes a bigger scene, and then you get all the way to like, these past few cons we've had 5 or 6 together, and it's like you're basically like a celebrity at that point, in the sense of like, yeah, you got like a line of people that want photos from you, and it's like we all joke you got like the Iron Man shuffle. It's like, okay, real quick, here's a photo. Okay, shimmy. Okay, here's a photo, and you move at 10 feet an hour, and so it's hard to get anywhere. But it's at the end of the day, it's like that's half the fun, is getting to see how excited everyone else gets to see the suit and stuff. It's like they don't know you're crying and sweating inside this thing, like you're suffering. It's like, oh, that thing pinches right now. It's like, oh, but the little kid wants a selfie. Yeah, woohoo.
Right. I imagine it's got to get really hot, especially in the California sun.
Yeah, well, okay, and for WonderCon, we got really lucky because normally that convention's like 90 plus degrees outside, but I think it was like high 60s or something with just pure overcast when everyone came out here. And so it was perfect. Like we all were able to hang out outside. We got a nice breeze and it was super comfortable. And that was definitely, all of us set records for how long we had been in suits ever at that convention. I think Frank and I were both suited up for about 6.5 hours straight. My record before that was 6.5 hours over the course of a day with an hour break in the middle. But so this was the first time I ever did it just straight shot. And it was definitely because it was a cooler day. I would not have made it. I would have been done with the suit in like 30 minutes. Otherwise,
Were you guys staying at the hotel there that's attached to the convention center, or did you have to?
I mean, I live close enough where I didn't have to, but we did make like Frank and Emily, who had hotel rooms, they became like home bases. So it was like my suit got bunked in with Frank and Kiara's suit got bunked in with Emily. And so that way, when we suited up, it wasn't like trying to walk a couple blocks from the parking garage or anything like that. So it's really difficult doing an Ironman suit without having a hotel room attached. It's something I've done a few times. I think the farthest I've ever had to walk was like 3.5 blocks to get to a convention center in the Ironman suit, and that takes a minute.
Oh man. Yeah, you ought to come to a con out here in Illinois. I don't live too terribly far from Kiera, where it's like we'll get cons in like March and April and stuff like that. And it's like still in the 40s or 50s. And
well, California conventions keep changing when they are. We used to have like spaced out conventions. It was like, there would be a convention in like June, July, August, and then you would have like October and December. And so you
Hmm.
kind of had it a little spaced out. It's like, yeah, you had like obviously summer is going to when you know, that's where the most conventions are going to be regardless. But it was like there was still at least like three major conventions outside of summer, but now they're all condensed. There's nothing. I think beginning of October is when LA Comic Con is now, and that's like the only one that's not during summer. Every other convention is summer now, and so it's just like it's toasty.
That's not a bad deal. They tend to do that out here, of course, with it being Midwest weather. They have to pack everything in
Mhm.
pretty much, because yeah, if you were to do a podcast like in or at a podcast, if you're going to do a con in like Chicago in like January where it's like 5 degrees and a -20 wind chill, like
Yeah.
half your cosplayers are going to die before they even get into the hall. Like
Mhm.
that's not fun for anybody. Um, what's the yeah you had said earlier about the difference in way that cosplayers and I definitely believe like the quality has like leaped made a quantum leap here in like the last few
Oh
years.
yeah.
Because I mean I think I went to my first con in like 2005, and yeah, there was like a lot of it was like if you got lucky and you knew, so either you knew how to sew or you knew somebody who knew how to sew, or yeah, you'd see a lot of the cardboard stuff where people would attempt to, and some of them got pretty good at it, but it
Yeah.
probably took like 10 times longer than it would and wouldn't near have the service. But now it's like you go to cons a day and you're just like, oh my god, like the quality that people are turning out is incredible. And I'm not saying
Mhm.
that machines, like 3D printers make it easier. There's still, I think, a ton
Well,
of
yeah,
hard
they're
work, and
cheating, you know.
yeah,
That's
it's cheating.
that, you know, me and Frank talk all the time. We love cheating, you know, it makes it
Yeah.
easy.
It does. That's true. It's true. But I think anybody who has gotten into this at all learns really quickly just how much like elbow grease and even
Yeah.
skill that has to be attained to put into post production of these pieces. Because, I think the very first time I produced something, I was so proud of it, and I threw some primer on it real quick and then painted it, and I'm like, "Yay, it's done!" And then as the months go by, the more you look at it, you're just like, "That thing is trash. That thing is absolute trash."
Yeah, I think it's 3D printing within cosplay, and I mean, I think just the support that the whole like cosplay industry has had over the last 10 years, because that's a huge part of it too. You know, it's like cosplay is, and especially now with TikTok too, it's like cosplay is, I would hesitate to say mainstream, but it is not the thing it was when I got involved, you know, 8 years ago, and definitely not the thing that it was 20 years ago or 30 years ago or anything else. But I think where 3D printing has done a great job is makes it easy to have something. It's up to individuals whether they want that thing to be like, oh, it needs to be exactly like the movie, or if they want it to be just something, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's great about that is, you know, yeah, people like to say, oh, well, you know, everything looks the same when it's 3D printed and stuff, and it's like, I mean, yeah, to a certain extent that might be the case, but the difference is there's way more people getting to do stuff now. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, yeah, every costume was more individual and unique pre 3D printing, but there was way less of them. It was like it would be a hunt, you know, to find something good. And a lot of people were too discouraged to really get into making stuff because of how much more complicated it was.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, you know, there's no shame in getting a 3D printer. And, you know, I've seen tons of teenagers and kids and everything that are trying to get into cosplay. And it's like, I think Mando suits are a great example of, it's like there's silver colored filament. It's a great costume. It's like just print it in silver. Get something and you can make a costume, you know. It's in, yeah, there's always going to be people where it's like, oh, well, it has the layer lines, and it's like no one cares. It's like a lot of, I think that's something that a lot of us builders worry about sometimes when it comes to our own work, when we might say like, oh, this thing we did in the past like looks bad, because it's a matter of, it's like it's to an individual standard of what we want to do, and there's always that delicate balance of, it's like, you know, someone can send me something where it's like, yeah, it's spray paint on a raw 3D print. I'm not going to be like, oh, well, you know, you're really going to need to work on this if you want something to come out nice. It's like, no, everyone starts somewhere. And if that's all you want to do with it, that's great. It's
Hmm.
like the fact that people can just do that is so cool now.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that was going to lead me to the next thing I was going to ask you about was just about like for you the experience within the community and sort of the environment that it is. But I strongly feel that we need to, as like all of us, and to some degree or another, are a steward of this greater community that we're dealing with. And I think it's really important to keep the negativity to an absolute minimum because at the end of the day, everybody who's here, whether they're a super professional maker or there's somebody who just did their first print, like we're all just doing it because we're passionate about the same thing. And
Yeah.
we're all just so excited to show off, what it is that we did. And I think your level of experience or expertise in that shouldn't really matter. Like that shouldn't be, the thing that you're
You
judged
should
on.
be here to have fun.
Mm-hmm.
And if you individually want to push for, I'll say a higher level of quality, once again, that's all relative, obviously, for what it is you want to do. But yeah, if you want to be more accurate, I'm incredibly grateful for the fact that there's a prominent enough community now that shares information where that can happen. I remember, when I first got started with all this, it was like everything was like this weird trade secret of how to do a certain thing and everything else. Because of the fact that it's like, as I was saying before, it's like only the best of the best knew how to make a specific type of costume. There was no standardized technology that made it a lot easier for anyone or anything like that. And so it's just, yeah, the door has been opened for so many more people to get involved in it now. And it's like, it's great. I've gotten to see that transition of like the entire cosplay community saw 3D printing as either one, if it was used in only a specific way, like this really cool technology, and it's great to be used in high quality builds. But then as soon as it was like, oh, well, those 5 people all printed the exact same Iron Man helmet. So that's cheating. It takes no skill to make an Iron Man helmet now. I had to sculpt mine out of clay. And it's like, every generation has a new tool that standardizes stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's really obvious. You can look online as it is. It's like there's a huge variety of models now, which there wasn't when it got started. So this idea of everything looking the same doesn't really make much sense anymore. But then also it's like how people choose to finish those makes a
Mm-hmm.
huge difference. You can do your own custom paint, you can go for accuracy. There's a million different ways to do everything after it's off the printer still.
Mm-hmm. Some of these guys, this is a complete side note here, but I feel like these modelers are like the unsung hero in this whole thing.
Oh, we have had a modeler revolution, in my opinion, over the last year or so. In a very similar way that we saw a lot of the 3D printing cosplay community kind of start going through some major shifts in like 2019 to 2020. I think like 2021 or like late 2021 and 2022 is now the modelers' chance to kind of catch up with that. And it's great. There's been a huge rise in independent modelers. And I'm really grateful for the fact that a lot of that has been able to come out of like the Discord servers that, both, our group and Frank built and everything. Like, we have people that are teaching tutorials on how to model in Blender, like literally every week. And it's
Mm-hmm.
super cool because it's like, once again, that's one of those things where it's like, well, only the best of the best used to know that. And so it was like trade secrets for 3D modeling. It's like you either had the really kind of janky models on Thingiverse, or you had like bigger companies such as like DO3D who had like industry professionals. But then it's like, okay, you got that one company that's charging a lot for their stuff, or you can go for the janky but like cheap or free alternative. But now you've seen this like huge boom in like I never thought I would see the day that a individual who just does 3D models would be able to pass like 10,000 followers on anything, just because modelers unfortunately got neglected a lot.
Mm-hmm.
People didn't care about what the digital thing looked like. They wanted to see the physical thing.
Right.
And I am so happy to have been proven wrong by that. Like so many amazingly talented people, like, Kevin, Vec 3D, and, our good friend Walsh
Oh
3D,
man.
like they are killing it right
Oh.
now and how well that they're doing on social media. And I love that because of the fact that it's like they're also not just like, oh, here's my model and then growing, but it's like they're helping the community. Like I know of at least 10 different people that are making and selling models now because they were taught by either Kev or Walsh just as part of like everyone hanging out in discords and being part of a community, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like I think there's going to be a lot more stuff that happens like throughout this year and next year where, you know, as of now, I think the issue is independent modelers still don't really have like a centralized place for stuff quite yet. And I think as soon as something like that happens, we're going to see a total shift in the way modeling works in the community. You know, as it is, people steal models way less. I remember when I got started, it was like, I don't even know how many Facebook groups I just like got invited to, and I would be like, "Oh, what's this?" And it's like, "Oh, there's like 1,000 stolen 3D models in here." Okay, and you know, thankfully now it's like that's not really a thing. People are respecting modelers as masters of their own craft. You know, it's being respected as a part of the process as opposed to just like, "Oh yeah, that's just a model." You know, that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter. So
Right. Well, these guys like Vec and Walsh, like they just need to stop. I mean, just stop. It's like every week something new pops up, and I'm like, I can't right now. I like all my printers are tied up, but I need that. Like that is
yeah,
God, what was that one that Walsh just put up this week of that like
was it
Iron Man?
the 85 or I think like the Ant-Man
Yes.
helmet?
Yes.
He's been putting out so much we don't even know which,
I
which one.
know. You can't say, hey, did you see that new one? Yeah, you'd literally be like, which new one? Yeah, for sure. That being said, the since you've kind of like been on this path and you've done these things, what all in all, how has the community been to you? How have you felt about it?
So it's been a matter of it was kind of interesting because you know as I said I got into to a lot of this before like 3D printing was cheap or you know mainstream enough to be used in cosplay, and so it was really interesting for me seeing the like really weird melting pot of how the 3D printing cosplay community formed because that, in my opinion at least, did not exist like 5 years ago. It was in maybe its baby infancy, you know, in like 2017, and finally kind of started showing up in 2018. And that's been, I think, the most interesting thing for me because, you know, it was like from the like straight cosplay side, it was always like, oh, well, like, yeah, you know, 3D printing is cheating or it's, you know, not reliable. It's like, yeah, you know, people could print in PLA, but PLA, as I said, used to be really weak. It was hard to do finishing work, you know, everything else. ABS on cheaper machines would warp, so you couldn't really make anything big. And so it was just really limiting. Meanwhile, on 3D printing side, because I've been very involved with that because of my engineering and industrial design background, it was really interesting seeing how like the engineering side of 3D printing like looked down on this idea of 3D printing being like a tool for hobbyists and makers. Like you don't need to be an engineer to use a 3D printer.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really interesting kind of seeing like almost like the idea of 3D printing cosplay get bullied from like both sides, to be honest, and seeing it just kind of like, yeah, slowly people started figuring out, slowly people started making their own little groups like I did. And like eventually just seeing it kind of explode in, you know, the last 2 years, especially where it's like 3D printing and cosplay could not be separated at this point, you know, and it's really cool to see how quickly uh the stigmas and stuff against 3D printing have changed in both the cosplay community and the 3D printing community itself. You know, it's like this idea of like cosplay being the reason people buy 3D printers is like a huge selling point now for
Mm-hmm.
a lot of these manufacturing companies, which is absolutely wild to me. You know, it's like, you know, when I got started, it was like, you're using that fancy piece of engineering equipment to make masks? Like, what's wrong with you? And now it's like literally, you know, people will like companies will be like, oh, this is great for cosplay. And it's like, wow, yeah, it has come so far so fast. And it's really cool that I was able to get in like just before that to kind of see how that's changed. And so it's like, yeah, it's just it's dope getting to see the direction it's going and everything. I'm excited to see how it continues to grow, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the things that I've been thinking about because it you know, and I had this thing where I feel like everything that you're talking about, I was like 100% oblivious to. And I just like walked into it like, oh, 3D printer. Oh, hey, look at the cool stuff I can make. And I just started making stuff. And it's like later you find out that there was like stories and evolutions for
The
different
wars,
communities.
the battles.
Like even Kiera had told me that like she was like later getting into 3D printing because she was a phone builder and thought 3D printers were cheaters, and then
Yeah.
eventually decided to give it a go. And now here we are. The yeah, that was the big thing for me because like my first printer was just a little flash forge. And it was great for me at the time because I was mainly making minis for Dungeons and Dragons. That was perfect for that. It was the first time I was like watching The Mandalorian, and I'm like, dude,
You're like, oh, I want that.
I wonder if I could do that. And that's literally how this all started for me. Is I went into YouTube and typed in 3D print Mandalorian helmet, and Frank's video came up, and that was like the nexus
that was
point.
that was how I found Frank.
Yeah.
I just because it was one of those things where it's like I was waiting to start seeing other people doing it, and as a early college student, like I wasn't really in the place to like be making tutorials myself as I was still figuring stuff out. But I was like, I was waiting. Like every few months, I would search like 3D printed Iron Man to see what popped up, find some new builders and everything. And then finally, I did it one time, and I see this Mark 85 update 9. I'm like, what is this? And I clicked on it. I'm like, oh, this guy seems pretty cool. I like that. And yeah.
And the rest is history. Now here we are both sitting here doing, talking about this. So
Precisely, yeah.
what so the question that I have, because I think this is important, because one of the things that I found when it comes to listeners to this podcast is you run into people who are either like deep in the community, like they can't get enough of this stuff, so they're just like soaking up every ounce of it they can, or people who are, which I think you see a lot of, and I'm not disparaging it, but a lot of noobs. And the reason why is I think within like the last couple of years, there's just been like a supernova of 3D printers, which is great. I'm not disparaging that because I was one of them. You know what I mean? So you get a lot of people who are new, are maybe to some extent insecure, are trying to figure out where they're going with all this. So after I unload all that, my question is that what kind of motivation or advice do you have for people who are new to this thing?
See, that's always the fun magic question. It's like, well, what is the magic piece of advice? And
right,
it honestly, it's a matter of like if it's something you want to do, just get started. There's literally never been a better time to try and get involved with a lot of this stuff. With how fast the community is growing and everything else, and ask questions, but also make sure to use Google because there is always that little bit of disconnect where it's like people are afraid to ask questions, and then there's people that ask questions that don't need to be asked. Like the amount of information that is out there, you want to make sure, regardless of before you do anything, educate yourself on what you're getting into. I think that is the big thing a lot of people who want to get into 3D printing don't do. They're like, oh, I hear I can get a 3D printer for this. And they'll buy a machine, not really know too much about it, or, something along those lines, get it, be afraid of the machine itself. And then as soon as something doesn't work, it's like, it's either, oh, it's broken, or, oh, I don't know how to use this. I'm too whatever for it. And so it's very difficult for people who I think don't have someone else that can help guide them with that. And I think when it comes to those people, there's a huge community now that you can come ask that, between like Frank's server, the Iron Legion server that we have. Like stupid questions are not stupid. As long as people are actually making an effort, there is a ton of people now that are willing to help people get started with it, which is great. I'm really happy to know the fact that like I know like me and Frank at least talk all the time about, we try to get back to every message that people have when they ask us about printers, whether it's troubleshooting or advice or anything else. So to kind of wrap that up into a nice little piece of advice, make sure you know what you're getting yourself into, because being educated and knowledgeable is the most valuable thing that you can do before getting into any of this. And then the only reason that you shouldn't get into something like this is because you don't want to do it. If it's something you want to do, there should be no other reason to hold you back from it,
Yeah, especially now because printers are so much more affordable than they used to be.
Yeah. Well,
You know.
it's funny. My a lot of the professors in my industrial design department, because they have been in the industry so long and aren't necessarily following the explosive growth 3D printing has had over the last several years. I remember having to explain to a whole class that a 200-ish $250 printer is not a janky piece of fire starting trash that my professor tried to make it sound like it was, because of the fact that, 6 years ago, that was the case. You can get amazingly good printers these days for $200, which obviously, everything's relative. $200 is not pocket change, but for what it used to be is incredibly cheap. And then I think the best part too is it's like cheap printers don't mean poor quality printers. Usually, if anything, it just means a little smaller. A
Mhm.
CR10 works the exact same way an Ender 3 does. Like literally the main boards, I don't know about now, but the main boards literally used to be the exact same boards. So it's like they all work the same way. You can get in cheap, if you understand how to take apart an Ender 3 and put it back together. You'll know how to do it for a CR10. You'll know how to do it for an Ender 5. And so it's just a matter of it's like, yeah, you know, start cheap, make mistakes, learn quickly, and then go have fun.
Right. Well, and I occasionally it's funny. I always end up like referring people to other people because from doing this podcast or from the some of the guests that gets on, I do get DMs with 3D printing questions, and frequently I have to be like, bro, you're asking somebody 5 minutes ahead of you, man. Like, like I get it. Believe, and I always tell people like, go check out so and so's YouTube or go over here and look at this or join this Discord or join this Facebook
go
group.
bug me.
Yeah.
I will do my best to always answer a 3D printing question.
Yeah, and that I'll add you to the list because for a long time I've just been telling them, hey, listen, Frank's DM is a help desk. Like, just go in there and. But the only piece of advice that I have given people, and I don't want to like make it sound like it has a negative connotation, but there is one simple truth: is that if you have several things that are bothering you or are not working, there is not a silver bullet that will kill all of them. And that's
Yeah.
it's the way the human brain works. We want to find that magic pill that just
There's
180s
yeah,
everything and everything now
there's
works
no easy
beautifully.
answer to stuff.
No.
That I mean, and actually that is a great point. I'm glad that you kind of brought that up because that is the one thing where it's like, one of the most common things I'll get is like, oh, my print looks bad. Why is that? And it's like, okay, there's one of 6,000 reasons. So I need a little more than this. And so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's a matter of it's like, it takes a little while to be able to pick up on why things might not work and everything else. And I think it's a delicate balance between people don't want to be afraid of this technology when they're getting into it. They want to be able to have confidence enough to make mistakes and fix things, but they also don't want to just like go in and be like, oh, well, I don't need to worry about anything. It's all going to work fine. I can do whatever. Because at the end of the day, it's like it is a tool. And as long as you can figure out how that tool works, you'll be fine. Um, but yeah, it's like I get stuck with stuff all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing 3D printing for almost 5 years now, and I still, I'll hit up Frank, I'll hit up people that have been doing it shorter than me, longer than me, because there are just so many different things that you can hit roadblocks with. It's like I've got a
Right.
printer that's been sitting in my living room not working for the last week because I just cannot figure out why it's not working right now.
Yes.
And it's like, the you're always learning. There's
Mm-hmm.
never like, I have mastered 3D printing. I can fix them all now. It's like, no, they outnumber you 1,000,000 to 1.
Yeah, and that's and I think the syndrome that unfortunately not a lot of people have, which is what I did, which is just this belief that when you buy a 3D printer that it's just a plug and play, that it's a
Yeah.
microwave. That plagued me for the first like 3 months, and I people have heard me tell this story, but yeah, the first like 3 months I thought there was something wrong with the printer. Like they sent me a lemon. Like there's no way that something that this much money got spent on is going to have this many problems with it. Eventually you learn like, yeah, it might have been slightly more than ordinary, but at the end of the day, what I didn't realize is that I was getting a printer, and in the same box came one massive learning experience. you know
Yeah.
that was
It's every printer, unless you got like millions of dollars and feel like buying a $250,000 machine, every printer that a average person will buy is a project printer. There are very few machines that are truly plug and play, and even the ones that a lot of people will argue are such as like say a Prusa or something. If you buy it pre-made, even machines that are like that, you'll still eventually have a hiccup, and it's always more valuable to learn about the technology, about the tools and everything else, because there's so much value in that. And that's the only way you can really get the most out of a lot of the machines. It's like you can experiment, try new stuff, because you're not worried about like, oh, well, that didn't work. It's broken now. It's like, oh, okay, I'll tighten that bolt or, whatever.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, I'm it, and there's an interesting sort of like marriage there in that, for example, I've got a close friend of mine who just on stuff that I've been doing, he's decided that he wants to get into 3D printing. And so he just ordered his
got another one.
yeah, got another one. So he ordered his first 3D printer and he's already asked me like, hey, when it comes, can you come over and help me set it up and everything? And I'm caught like in between the two things where I want him to get into it because I know like once he gets over that like hump, he's going to really enjoy it. But I don't want to turn him off ahead of time by saying now, hey, you could have a problem with your extruder. It could be the kind of filament you're using. It could be your slicer settings. It could be, you didn't clean your bed. It could be any one of a million things. So I'm already just preparing to have like my phone on me 24/7 for like the first 6 months. And chances are half the time I'll be like, I don't know, man. You got to go hit up CTK, man. Like, go ask him.
I think the pain in the butt thing too is it's like when you get started, it's like you don't even understand how to troubleshoot.
Mm-hmm.
So then, like, unless you can have like an actual friend in the room with you, a lot of the time it can be difficult to be like, oh, well, I know that this is specifically the issue. It's like a lot of the time when you're first getting started, it's like you don't know what the issue is. You just know something ain't working.
Right.
Oh, it's making a scary noise. Or
Yeah.
like, oh, well, nothing's coming out. And you're like,
yeah.
Turn the nozzle on, and it's like, you have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so
I had that the second print I ever did. I came back 6 hours later to a pile of spaghetti on the build plate. And when you're new, you're like, I remember just staring at it like an Ewok looking at a phaser, like, the hell? Like, you don't even know where to begin. And I think that's where the quick answer comes in. Like, you just want to be able to, and somebody can just say, oh, go to your printer and hit this button and it'll never happen again. It's a comforting thought to think that something's going to work that easy, but unfortunately it just does not sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, we're getting up against the clock here, man. Anything you want to say to folks on the way out?
I mean, for anyone who wants to get into this, like, please do. Some of my best and long-term friends I am lucky enough to have made through this community. So yeah, talk to other people, find other nerds, make friends, have fun. If your printer is making a scary noise, DM me,
Okay, yeah, like I said, we're gonna add you to the help desk list. Like, just
It's like, I was referred to you by James.
Yeah.
Like, okay, here we go.
Yeah, you're gonna end up blocking me in about 3 weeks, so it'll be all right. So, well, all right, man, Danny. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
Thanks for inviting me. Yeah,
been a great conversation. We got through maybe half the stuff I wanted to bring up, but that's okay.
That's how it goes.
Right. Well, all right, man, we'll leave you be. And yeah, hopefully we'll get to talk to you again sometime.
Awesome. All right. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, man.
All right.
All right. So that was the episode with Danny Curry. Hope you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun making it. I want to thank everybody out there for tuning into the podcast, liking, sharing, subscribing, all that fun stuff. I greatly, greatly appreciate it. I'm going to get out of here. But until next time, I want to say I love all you. Hope you take care of each other. And we'll talk to you next time.